Good afternoon. This is Tim Selden from the Montessori Foundation. With me today is my colleague, Dr. Michael Dorr, and my friend Jono Landon, who is the president of the Hubbli company. I asked Jono to speak to us a number of times now for a couple of reasons. One is we've just started using Hubbli at our lab school, and we're getting ready to start using it at the Montessori Foundation. And we're trying to understand what it does, what it doesn't do. We use a lot of tools. We use Montessori Compass. We're very fond of that. We've traditionally used Constant Contact or Robly. But something that Jono said long ago that really got my attention was that most schools train parents to ignore their emails. And I know in my heart of hearts that's true. And I think that, one, it looks to me like Hubbli has software that is a piece of the needs that many of us have, and it's really worth looking at. But more importantly to me, in all candor, is you, Jono. I think you've got insights and experience that I really value, and I'm really glad you agreed to come back and talk with us more. So today is going to be, as much as possible, a question and answer. We really want all of you who are out there listening to take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions. Remember, you can ask questions or get my attention by looking at the panel on the right side of your screen. It's called the GoToWebinar Control Panel. You've got several separate little pieces of that on the side. One of them says questions. If that's not showing you the question panel, there's a little arrow. You click it, drops down, and you can see where you write questions and see answers. We also want to encourage you, if you feel like you have something you want to say live, if you want to talk to Michael or Jono or me, just let us know. Keep the dog that's barking in the background quiet, or your babies or all the kids in the school quiet, and we'll be happy to open your mic up, and we'll be happy to hear your pretty voice. So let's get going. Jonah, let's start with your pretty voice. Welcome back. We're happy to have you. How's the weather up in Toronto, Canada?
We're experiencing a heat wave today, so we're over 30 degrees Celsius. I forget what that is Fahrenheit, but it's pretty hot, and we're generally pretty humid up here too. So, yeah, it's hot. But I'm not going to compare myself to Florida. What you guys are probably going through right now. So, whatever it is here, it's great.
We love it in Florida too. It's great. So,
actually, Jono, I'm in Minnesota, so it's a little more. Although we have a heat wave, it's hitting 92 degrees here today. Obviously Fahrenheit.
I hope.
So that would be a little bit bad if it were Celsius. So we're at three completely different locations, and I think that's typical of the whole Montessori Foundation group. We're all over the place.
Yeah, and that's why I love being involved in these webinars. It's such an honor to have this platform because we've been helping schools for years now to build communication systems. We've learned a lot, and it started out on my expertise really came from more of a technical side and a marketing side, but just the more and more I work with schools and we learn and we see what is working, what isn't working, we're now at a point where literally we could write books on the subject, and we probably will. It's in the plans, but we're it's so nice to be able to sort of like have a channel like this to kind of start formulating the message that we're trying to communicate. That's kind of sort of separate from the software that we create, because software is software, and there's a lot of options out there. Tim kind of got onto that subject. He's using a lot of different tools and systems, and Constant Contact, MailChimp or Robly. I mean, the list goes on, and there's endless choices. But what we're learning is completely software agnostic. This is just how do you use the tools that you have, whether it's Hubbli or other tools, and that's what I love getting to talk about in a forum like this. So today I want to start off by talking about some of the problems that we're seeing in the education sector in general, and then some solutions that will hopefully save you and your staff, your school, a lot of time and a lot of money. And generally speaking, everything that we talk about, or that I'm going to talk about, is really from the stance of the business side of running the school. And you are businesses, of course, and you have customers, and you have to keep those customers happy in order to thrive, and that is a moving target. Something that I think probably everybody in the audience today will agree. Things are changing. What worked 10 years ago, it doesn't work today. People are seeing enrollment patterns changing, expectations changing, and I would say the expectations around communication is what's probably changing the most. And there's, on that topic, communication systems, because of that moving target and that ever-changing scenario, the systems are getting more and more entangled. And if we're all honest with ourselves, people that are running schools are generally not, communication system experts. You generally have a master's in education, not necessarily a master's in, not an MBA. I'm sure some do, but you guys are communication experts in the sense of what does a parent need to hear, and what does a child need to hear, and how do you listen, how do you engage parents. But the tools by which to facilitate that is becoming more, it's becoming a very thick forest. So also I want to say, go ahead.
If I can jump in here, what you're saying really is important, and there are several issues. One is the average parent really doesn't know what they're getting from a Montessori education. We usually do not use workbooks. We do not send home textbooks normally. We do not typically have a week-by-week, day-by-day lesson plan. I've seen schools that will tell the parents, on Monday we're going to be talking about turtles, and at noon we're going to be having, chicken and rice to eat, and then in the afternoon we're going to talk about famous artists, whatever. I've seen all sorts of schools. In our schools, parents often are not quite sure what the devil they're getting for all that money they're spending. And even in the government-funded schools, the charter and the public Montessori schools, I talk to Montessori school leaders all the time who are worried about hanging on to their enrollment because parents tend to get nervous, and they really don't know how to judge a school other than by test scores, and those are normally only at the 3rd grade, the 6th grade, and the 8th grade. So it's not like they're getting moment-to-moment reassurance. You are not really making the biggest mistake of your life sending your kid to that monastery school. The other thing is that you brought up last week is you've got to be careful, because there's a lot of tendency to have many different systems in play, and parents get aggravated. And there's also an issue about consistency of what is being said and what kind of stuff might get you into trouble. Because on one hand, you've got to help parents to understand what are they getting from their experience. So there's a software out there right now that's very popular, and I think at the moment it's even free. It's called Blooms. And John Wolf has been consulting with them, and it's a very cool system, and maybe some of you listening use it. And as I understand it, a teacher sets up an account, and basically they'll take a photograph and they'll send it with maybe a little bit of text, like an Instagram, and it is sent out to the parents in their group. And it sounds like a really good idea until you see a picture that actually offends a parent. You know, like, I didn't want my kid's picture sent out there, or my kid looks stupid in that picture. And the next thing you know, some parent has put it on Facebook and it's going viral. So you can get into a lot of trouble real quick with this kind of stuff. That's one of the other things you've been saying.
Yeah, and that's a really, I mean, all great points. And the thing that I want to come back to actually is I had never considered what really that, I mean, that's another distinction of Montessori to other schools, and I'm always learning more and more, especially as I attend these webinars with you. Your customers, I mean, any customers, any business your customers need to know the value that they're getting. And they need to know also maybe that there's value in the information they're not getting, and why. And I know that the Montessori Foundation is probably the best source of parent education for Montessori parents, and I think that that content is so crucial. If the scenario, I mean, and this is just kind of marketing 101, keeping your customers happy, so that they re-enroll every year, right? Keeping your parent. I use the word customers, and I know it makes things really sort of, maybe overly business-like, but and I'll, I interchange customers with parents, or clients with parents. I mean, it's parents. Essentially, the children are the, they're the customer too, of course. They're the reason why the parents are there, but the parents are the ones that make the decision. They make the spending decisions, and they're the ones that communicate and decide where their children go to school. So you need to really, really make sure that they're feeling great about the fact that their children are there and that they're seeing progress. And I've been involved. Hubbli is involved a lot with that. Sharing, we have tools to share progress reports with parents, and scope and sequence or any other type of documentation. And so I've got a fairly good understanding of that side of communication, and we're gonna, I don't want to get too deep into specifics now, but there's various kinds of communication that a school needs to master. And the topic of the webinar today is how to also make things standardized and consistent, and the reason why that's so important. And so before I jump into that, I just want to say, as you guys obviously know at this point, I'm the founder and I'm the CEO of Hubbli. So and I, as I said, this information that we're sharing today, this is just, this is agnostic of any tool. The value of Hubbli is that, and here's my little commercial plug for Hubbli, is that we centralize all the different tools you would ever need to manage, and we make sure that things work the right way, and it's that it's, you get a standardized communication system out of the box without having to figure out how to create that and all the value that comes along with that. So, and I just want to mention that, this is something that we're offering only to the Montessori Foundation members that are here in attendance today. But anybody that is interested, in learning more about Hubbli or signing up for our system today, we're going to be offering actually a massive discount. We've only offered this one other time, and that was when we did last week's webinar. And it's very, very exclusive to only you people that are seeing this. So we generally have a setup fee of either $24.99 or $49.99. If you sign up today, you won't have to pay that. And there is we have a monthly subscription. If you sign up today, you can get an annual subscription with 2 free months. So basically, you're getting it for, depending on the scenario, more than half price. And I'll just move on now. I just wanted to get that out there so that everybody knew the opportunity, and you'll be able to follow up with me after the webinar today as well. and we'll send along some communications. Moving into the content of the webinar here, every school that we talk to is using, on average, 20 different communication tools. And communication is a broad term. So some people might think that's high or actually unrealistic. But actually, what we find every time we talk to a school, they usually say, oh, we've got 3 or 4 or 5, you know. But then when we actually start going through all the different forms of communication that the school has to manage, they start seeing that they actually have tools for almost every single one of them. And they are disparate databases that have to be managed, meaning every tool has its own user interface that has to be learned, and it's usually not a tool developed specifically for schools. So there's usually a bunch of features that don't have to be, that kind of have to be ignored or might even cause liabilities. And so these tools generally, you have to like input the contacts in there and manage them manually. That can often take 2 hours per tool per month. That's about the average that we see. And we also find the schools are still using an incredible amount of paper, which is costly on its own just to buy the paper and the printer ink, and if you have to mail anything, the postage. But the hours that it takes to manage paper, that is where the money is really spent, and the loss really happens, is the hours. Like if you need to look things up through a stack of paper, how many hours is that going to take? And how many hours does it actually accumulate to when maybe you just have to look up a couple things. It's not that big of a search, but you have to do it 20 times a day in paper, and you have to go to the filing cabinet, open up the filing cabinet, search for the child, print out the paper, go to page 10, look at the checkbox. Hopefully the parent checked the box. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It becomes death by 1,000 cuts, because but really it's like 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 20 minutes here, over and over and over again. It's just so much time. And if you're not actually calculating the cost of those hours, you're not thinking like a business. And I'm going to keep on coming back to that in this presentation. Think like a business. You guys have to make schools. I think my personal stance is that schools really need to start thinking more like businesses and forcing themselves, because you are businesses. And I know everybody knows that. I don't want to sound condescending, but there's things I just happen to see it in every school I talk to, that there are certain types of approaches to looking and making business decisions that I think generally are missing. And this is one of them. This is a huge one. So they just to go to my next slide here. Modern technology, excuse me, has proven to be, obviously a great advantage in many cases, but it can be a very, very large disadvantage when it comes to communication between parents and schools. Schools, there's an endless way of connecting to parents. Every day there's a new way to connect with parents, and your parents use them. And they actually start, as these different tools and systems become adopted, around the world, like Facebook or WhatsApp, Skype, FaceTime, text message, all these things become the way that your parents actually communicate. And here's the thing, you need to meet them there, or they don't get the information, right? If you don't communicate with your market, with your parents, with your customer base, the way they communicate with everybody else in the world, your information gets lost. So, there's all these outlets, and it really should be, theoretically, all this stuff should make communication super convenient. But actually, it's much harder to communicate with parents than it ever has been, because of all these endless options that keep on popping up. So it's a bit of an oxymoron. So parents, having all these different methods means that parents would have to connect, and check constantly all these different tools, and that is what's happening today, right? Schools are trying to meet parents in all these different channels. That's what we see, but they're not. But the problem is schools don't know how to manage that, and then they start using the wrong channel for the wrong form of communication, for the wrong content, and just misusing the channels, and also, and then it becomes like hours spent trying to, I mean, just doing repetitive communication. When things aren't, when certain information is put into the wrong channel, you can push parents away, and you can be ignored, and you can annoy them, and you can, frustrate them, which is all the things that you don't want to happen. So I want to consider something here, like what is the result when when parents aren't informed, right? So, like, if they don't know what's going on, like, does that make your life easier or harder? And I know the answer is obvious. It's a lot harder. But think about what it means. Like, when a parent doesn't know, the information that they need to know, then oftentimes you have to make sure they know it. So, like, that's why the triplicate and the quadruple, efforts into one message that could have easily gotten there, and you could even be using the right tool. You can even get confirmation that they saw it, and that it's like, okay, great, I don't need to follow up with that person anymore because they got the message. But knowing how to build a system like that, it's challenging, and it's a lot of information. So I want to ask the audience, right? What are your most used tools? But maybe more importantly, how many tools are you currently using to manage communication? Between, let's say, between the parents and the office. So think about all the different ways you need to communicate, right? How many different databases are you managing?
Well, I don't know about anyone else. No one else is speaking at the moment, but I know we use something called Hubbli, which is like MailChimp and Constant Contact.
Okay.
And we use QuickBooks Online.
Okay.
And we have used FileMaker Pro as our database, but we're not using it online at the moment.
Uh-huh.
We use Microsoft Word, but mostly we use Google Docs.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, and we use Facebook, of course, and Twitter. The biggest pain in the neck that I find is keeping everything straight. For example,
mm-hmm.
One of my favorite programs is TATS. But we have to work really hard to keep the database in TADS consistent with the database everywhere else. So it's tricky.
Yeah, yeah, and that can be a full-time job, and it is a full-time job for a lot of people. And sometimes it's a full-time job, and that's not their full-time job, right? And actually, that's a lot of times from what we hear. But it's funny that you say FileMaker Pro is our database, because I would argue and say so is Hubbli, and so is QuickBooks,
mm-hmm.
and so is Facebook, and so is MailChimp. All of those things are databases, and they are your databases, and you have to maintain them if you're using them. Because obviously, if you're sending out a newsletter through Hubbli, you need to make sure that information is up to date. And there are ways, by the way, it is possible to actually, for the most part, for a lot of these tools, to get them to synchronize with each other, but you almost have to be a web developer to know how to make that happen, or you have to be incredibly tech savvy, and all of those tools change, and the systems that connect these things are changing. So again, that itself can be a full-time job, just maintaining that information, and so nothing comes easy. And that brings me to another point that I like to mention, is that people are like, a lot of times people say, well, we use MailChimp and it's free, and that's why we use it, because it's free. And I beg to differ, because if using MailChimp costs you 5 hours a month, that's not very free. And if you don't value your time, you're not thinking like a business person, and you're not making business decisions. So there are no free tools. It's just not true. Not when you're running a business and your job is to communicate with parents. If the tool is free, that is the smallest part of the expense is the monthly fee for the tool. The biggest part of the expense is the person that is managing the tool, and especially if they are managing 5 different tools that all have to have the same database information, and they have to spend 5 hours a tool import. So there's no free tools out there, and that is something you really need to consider. And
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
I want to jump in on this one, Jono. One, I agree with you. There's no question. It takes time. And in theory, you should be able to export from one and import to the other, but it normally just is not that simple. And the other thing is, quite often, it's either the head of school, like my friend Kathy Leach, who usually is one of our co-hosts. She does her own weekly newsletter. She does a great job. It eats up a lot of her time. But she basically is computer savvy, and she does her own work. And I was asking you before we started about how do you get all this stuff done? And you were saying, I need to hire someone to do it for me because I'm getting stretched thin. And I can tell you, for years, I was one of the most prolific writers in Montessori. And about 4 years ago, I just sort of crashed and burned from overload. And I'm sort of trying to get my groove back.
Sure.
But let me give you guys a real-life situation. Jono and I were sitting at the AMS conference in March. And I barely knew Jono. He flew down from Toronto, and he's sitting there, and we're having breakfast together. And I get a phone call. And I walk outside of the restaurant, and it's this realtor that I work with in Texas. And years ago, my parents, bought a bunch of land, and they started a school. It's called the Barry School. And many years later, I sold the school to the parents. And then what do you do with the money from that? Well, I bought an office building, and I kept that for 10 years. And we managed it. And some of you online may have even seen that building in Alexandria, Virginia. It's really cool. And then about 9 years ago, we said, gosh, we really want to diversify. So I bought a building in Texas, and I bought a building in North Carolina. And you're asking yourself, what has this got to do with Montessori? Well, here's what it's got to do with Montessori. About March, I get a phone call. Someone wants to buy your building. I have spent very little time other than dealing with that ever since the AMS conference. So the building sold. And that should have been simple, because my wife, Joyce, and I, we've been out looking at warehouses and office building, all kinds of properties. Again, what's this got to do with Montessori? Well, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we found a building, like the building everyone wishes they had for their Montessori school. If you know what a gold certified LEED building is, L-E-E-D, it's like the ultimate in green buildings, and it's gorgeous. And it costs millions and millions of dollars to build. And it has Montessori middle and high school written all over it. It's gorgeous. So I run a little school just like you guys do. Montessori Foundation has a lab school in Sarasota, Florida called the Newgate School. And that little lab school goes from toddlers through high school. Some of you have actually been down here and you know what it looks like. I know Mike will be down here in another month or so working with the teachers of our little lab school. So we're right in the trenches just like you are, because it keeps us honest. It reminds us of what it looks like. So again, what has my selling of an office building in Texas got to do with you? Well, Joyce and I are in a position where we have to buy something. And that's called a capital gain shelter, or a 1031 tax-free exchange. So we have a certain number of days to buy a new building. Guess what we got in our heads to do? Buy this drop-dead gorgeous building. Well, what do you think the parents of our lab school think of that? You think that they think the idea of moving those high schools out, kids are out, is a great idea? Well, some of them do, but more of them are in tears. How would you do that to us? And how could you do it during the summer? And we have no time to talk this through. And you need to take more time. And man, Jonah, do I wish Hubbli was up and fully operational for us right this minute, because what we need is a virtual campground. We hold monthly community meetings here. Now, I noticed that Jessica says, I use Google Groups. Well, yeah, so do I. I've got a lot of Google Groups. Google Groups are like Facebook. It tends to come out as an email. Most people get so many of those darn things, they ignore them unless the title just grabs their attention, like Tim's walking down the street and he's dressed like a clown. You got to read this. And so they ignore it. That's what you keep saying, Jono. We're training our parents to ignore much of what we send out. And that is really true. And so the problem with Google is unless you sign in to Google Groups, you tend not to be able to remember, what was that email I thought I saw? And very few people know how to do that. And most of the time they ignore it. And what I appreciate about what you're trying to do, Jono, is train us to be better at what we communicate and how we communicate. I got a 10-page document I'm working on right now explaining to my parents all the pros and cons of what we're doing. And we will send it out. And Jono, you're going to look at it and say, oh, Tim, really? And I've got a 60-minute video that I've created that walks them through point by point what we're doing and why. And it still doesn't replace the give and take of real-time conversation. And that's what I appreciate. So I threw that up. That's a real-life example.
Did you say 60 minutes?
Yeah, 60 minutes.
Okay. Okay, that's a whole other webinar, but that's long. But I applaud you for that's a lot of effort, and obviously what we're seeing here is an example of making a big strategic decision that's having an impact on your parents and on your customers, and I think the main point here is that it's how things are communicated will make this go better or worse, and that's something that we see with our schools. That's something we see with our customers. That's an ongoing challenge, and that's why communication standards are so important. And Google Groups, that's just a great example of a tool that certainly can be used the right way, and the right way is the discussion here, right? So Hubbli, we have a feature that offers that type of communication amongst all the other types of communication a school needs, but there's a way of using a group feature, right? So Hubbli Groups has, we have groups very similar to a Facebook group. It's also very similar to a Google group. These things are not that different from each other because, you don't need to recreate the wheel. It's more importantly how you use those. And as far as the parent engagement side of things, what type of information is going into those channels, and what kind of, it does get important on a feature level when you're talking about notification settings and can parents turn off the notifications? Can you override them? So we learned early on that schools, when you're creating a group, like a social group feed type of feature for schools, you do want parents to have the ability to turn off the notifications because, like me, actually, they drive me crazy, right? But at the same time, that's me, and I do go and check when I need to check. So generally speaking, for instance, on Hubbli, we allow our parents to say no notifications, send me a daily digest, send me a weekly digest, or just send me everything in real time. But even if they turn them all off, you want to be able to override those for things that are urgent. So sometimes you need that control to say, no matter what, they're getting this notification, right? So, these are all things to consider, and you don't always have that type of control on all these tools that can change whenever they want, right? First of all, they're not built specifically for schools. They're built to be for everybody, and they change their privacy policies, they change their features, they disappear, and you're left holding the bag, and sometimes you're left holding the price tag for the risk that can come with those, especially when they do things like change privacy policies. And in the small print, they reset everybody's own, like Facebook is they're famous for this, Every now and then they change their privacy policy, which triggers a reset. So all these people that thought they were protected from sending out something they weren't supposed to send out to the wrong people find out they're not protected. I know teachers that I think they're insane, but they actually have Facebook accounts and they have friended their students who are minors, and like they don't realize that a child could take an inappropriate picture of herself and tag that teacher in it, and then that teacher's friends and coworkers could be notified that this person is connected to this image, and that could just it could create a hailstorm of liability, and you just have no control, and that's the problem. It's like you want to use these tools, and this is why Hubbli exists, actually, is because we saw that schools are cobbling together all these different tools that are great. They offer great value, but you need control over that environment, and schools need a certain level of permission settings and setting. It really does come down to a certain level of control that you need, and also having things in the right context specifically for a school. And figuring out how to put that patchwork together again can be a master's degree. It actually is a master's degree. People get masters in communication systems. It's and this is what they're studying. So let's talk a second for on the topic of what happens when there aren't communication standards in place. Like, what can be the costs of that, right? Why is it so important? Why is this topic actually so important? And so let's talk about what costs exist for communication. So this is a spreadsheet, and there's probably more information in here that's necessary for this topic. But one thing I want to draw your attention to, if you look on the right side, there's a column header called ROI. So that's return on investment. Okay, the left column is it says current estimated cost. Okay, so I'm not going to get into what builds these costs, because just for the sake of time. But what we see is that schools, I'd say beyond the physical property, the expense that schools are spending on a monthly basis for a school on average number of students at 150 students, a school is spending over $30,000 a month managing communication across their staff for 150 students. Now, this is built on some basic assumptions. I think everybody in here, would agree, and if there was any disagreement, it would be on very small percentages. Maybe move that number to 41 or 38. But in general, as we talk to schools on a daily basis, and we take them through this, so that schools understand, that the time that their staff spends managing communication systems is an expense. And if you're not looking at that, then you're missing a very, very important element in your business plan. And if you can reduce that expense, you can create incredible margin for your operating expenses. And on top of that, these communication tools, if used well, should also result and higher revenue as well. So so we think that it's fair to say that proper usage of communication systems should substantially reduce your expenses, where we think that we can drop easily, just by being more efficient. And this doesn't require using Hubbli. Just in general, if you reduce the average mistakes and misuse of communication tools that we see, you could reduce your expenses from just around managing communication from $30,000 down to $10,000 a month. And we also think that if you knew better how to use communication tools to promote the school and to give the parents, your existing parents, the ability to share and create a more a higher renewal rate or re-enrollment rate, excuse me, and also word of mouth referral rate, which can all be done with communication tools. You could also increase revenue by 10%. So increase enrollment by 10%, which would bring another $100K into the school. So it's pretty fair to say that by utilizing communication tools the right way, you should be able to create, for a school with 150 students, you should be able to create you should increase your net margin by $350 to $400K a year. And that actually is staggering when you think about that, because we're not talking about doing anything that you're not doing. We're actually just talking about do what you do, but do it better, like more efficiently. And this is why, that's one of the reasons why we're so excited as a school communication software company about this market. Like obviously, we do this because we love this and we want to see schools improve, and we want to have an impact on the education and the outcome of success for children. But we would only be doing this to be totally. We're not a nonprofit, we're doing this because there's a great business opportunity, and the reason why there's a great business opportunity is because schools are, their communication management is like, there's such an underserved market for knowledge of how to use these tools properly, and really the reason is because what we see is that from staff member to staff member and and teacher to teacher, like I'm going to separate staff, let's say admin staff to faculty. Everybody's finding their own ways to communicate. Every school we talk to, Michael, we talked about this last week. There's a really important aspect to Montessori where you need to give the teachers autonomy over what they do, make decisions for themselves, and that's also something that's really big in the software development world too, like giving web developers autonomy over what they're actually working on. But the thing is, though, you still have to create the framework and the structure so that when they pick what they're going to do or how they're going to do something, they're doing it within a framework that is beneficial and not harmful to the business. So I think I think we should dive into that so much more. I mean, I think that is, this is where, if you could imagine, right? If you can imagine another type of business that allowed their staff or their frontline staff to have the type of autonomy that would actually damage the business, because that is what teachers can do. Teachers can damage your business. Every day we hear of schools that have to, go into a settlement because a teacher damaged their business. And not just teachers, other staff, or it could be another parent too. But things happen that create liability, right? A teacher, I just heard recently a teacher had to be fired because she was using Facebook, a Facebook group, and she shared an image that she wasn't supposed to share. And she didn't have permission to share that image, and you put it onto Facebook. That is public domain. I don't care what the permissions are of the Facebook group. That doesn't matter, right? Like, you're taking an image of a child and you're putting it in the public, and you're giving it to Facebook, you know, and they don't and they don't have any, like, they're not. There's no rules for them, really. I mean, and if you read through all their terms and conditions, if you have 5 days to read through them, you see that, you know, they can pretty much do whatever they want with that once it gets shared. And that's why, you know, bigger districts, the big public school districts generally just have a sweeping policy, like no social media, you know, or no Facebook, because to create a policy takes them like 2 years, and then Facebook is a totally different product by the time they're done with the policy. So, you know, this is real liabilities, and I suggest that if you're doing business planning, and I hope you are, and if you're looking at your budgets, and it's not even on this spreadsheet here, but this is something that is so crucial, and I think that, and I've never actually heard a school thinking like this before. I'm not saying that none do, but, you know, it's really crucial to consider that your expenses on paper like this, this could actually be kind of misleading, and I think that actually what we're seeing here, this is missing a really important element, and the reason why it's not on here is because it doesn't make sense in this kind of for this type of like cost and expense breakdown. But you should definitely be considering the cost of the risk in your business decision, right? Like any business decision made without calculating risk is not actually a business decision. I mean, any accredited investor will tell you that if you're not adding the cost of risk into your business plan, then you're actually not making a business plan, right? Like, you're not making a business decision if you think you're going to put money into anything and there's no risk, right? It's just like, oh, well, like, paper costs this much, and, you know, this tool costs that much, and the building costs this much. Okay, and where are the risks? And where is the expense item for the risk? And if you're not adding that in, you're not making a proper business decision. And it's a really simple thing to consider, you know, how much does it cost if you have to fire a teacher, or if you have to, you know, settle with a family that sues you, right? Like, not saying that that's going to happen to you every year, but you can't say that the probability of there isn't there, because you have a scenario where you've got children and you've got parents and staff make mistakes, and, you know, obviously in an ideal world your parents are forgiving and open-minded and progressive and not litigious, but, like, you know, good luck, you know, if you think that's never going to happen to you. And the bottom line is there is a probability that you're going to have these kinds of expenses, and so they're there. You know, of course you've got insurance for these purposes too, but if you make that assumption, you know, that you can control communication standards, then it's really easy to say that by doing so, by adding a controlled standardized communication system, you can reduce that risk, because your teachers won't be going to Facebook and doing things that are risky, and they'll be in a system that you have the ability to control, all the while getting the benefit of. Now, you want to make sure that you get the benefit that those tools like Facebook and, you know, Google Groups or whatnot give you, but you want it to be in your, you know, basically under your control, under your permission settings, right? So what? Okay, I really want to get away now from the negative stuff, because we've been actually harping on it, and that's probably my fault more than anybody's. But I do believe that you know, there's a great value in not being paranoid, but being, you know, maybe I think Tim Collins coined the phrase productively paranoid, right? You really do have to think about the things that can go wrong, and you got to hope for the best, and, you know, there also has to be planning for the worst. And so I know I sound like an insurance salesman right now, but let's get away from that. So what does it mean, though, on the more positive side, when parents really appreciate how you communicate with them. So if you are meeting parents where they want to be as far as communication standards go, and they're getting consistent communication from every teacher, meaning they know exactly what to expect, when to expect it, where to expect it, and how to expect it. They know exactly, it's like clockwork. It comes the same way. It appears the same. It becomes a pleasure, right? And the communication system that you use is built to lower the barriers of communication and be the most convenient, while giving you the information you need. How much more likely are they to recommend your school to others? And how much more likely are they to re-enroll their child? Because they're just because they're in love. They're in love with your school, right? So, I mean, Tim, you talked about, obviously, a lot of your parents are connected to the physical place, right? And I'm going to assume if you were to just change your staff all of a sudden, that would probably also have an impact and a response from your parents. And if you change the way you communicate with them, I bet that also has an impact. Our prospective parents, I want you to think, are they more likely to enroll their children if they come to your website, or if during your communication process, whether from the inquiry process through to enrollment, booking a meeting and doing all these things, all these different forms of communication and communication management. If you have to think about all these different parts of communication, you've got an enrollment, generally an enrollment form, then you've got a follow-up, then you've got a tour or appointment booking, then you've got a decision that has to be made, and somebody has to make that decision and check on the status of everybody, and all these different things are communication pieces. And then they have to fill out an enrollment form, and then they have to get information about the events at the school. There's all these different things. So if through that process, right, where a parent can decide to say, you know what, I'm going to go to another school, but if they actually feel a sense of trust and security and professionalism from from your website, from your newsletters, from your emails, from your forms, hopefully digital forms. We really think you should be using digital forms because number one, it saves you a lot of time from paper management, but also it's a much better experience for parents when they can fill out forms on their phone from wherever they are, and they don't, I can go on and on about this, but forms are something that just suck up so many hours of management. It's incredible especially with paper. But if they can be done digitally, you can reduce your workload in the office probably on just with forms itself probably by 50%. So if all of those different types of communication are great and standardized, and they give that, it really comes down to that sense of trust. If they give parents a sense of trust, how much more likely are they going to enroll? And these things have huge positive impacts on your school, of course. So, Tim, did you want to pipe in on this topic?
I do. I'm actually going to feed you a slightly different thing that's come in from Maria Martin.
Oh, great.
I like what I see, and I have a question. I know you can handle invoicing. Do you have an auto debit, auto payment ability? We at our school have virtually no delinquencies because we're able to automatically charge everyone on the first of the month. What's interesting to me about this is online we have Barton Pyre, who's the president of a company called TADS that handles that kind of function too. So we may have a good conversation on both sides. So start off with you. Talk to us about what you're able to offer schools in that area.
Sure. Yeah, we actually do have the ability. So one of the things that we do is invoice management. Schools can set up automated invoicing and can basically create. Parents can create an account and a payment account if the school wants to accept payments either by e-check or by credit card. Usually e-check is a preference because it's only like a 1% transaction fee. So we actually bring, so we allow, our invoicing system allows schools to manage, manual payments as well, to put that against the parent account. And so you can draw reports and everything up to date based off a check that comes in and send a receipt automatically or whatnot. But yeah, we do allow for parents to set up a payment account via e-check or credit card. They want to go that route as well. That just automatically withdraws from the same account on whatever, usually on a monthly basis for the tuition or a one-time fee.
Martin Pyer, you're on the line. Let me know if you would like to have me open your mic up, because I'd love to have you talk to us about what you do. By the way, Maria Martin was very frustrated because she had asked this question a bit ago and she lost her sound for a few minutes. So,
oh no!
Remember, we record these things, and if you're now hearing the gist of what Jono just said is, Hubbli has the ability to set up these kinds of auto debit transactions as well. And in all candor, Jono, I haven't used it yet. I don't know how it works. I couldn't swear what you do or do not do, but I do know you say that you have a QuickBooks Online interface. Is that correct? Yeah. We have you can connect to QuickBooks Online or any other online accounting software that has an API. I'm getting very technical, but yeah. So payments and can be tracked against a customer automatically within QuickBooks Online, as an example. Sure.
Yeah.
By the way, Martin Payer from TAD says he doesn't have a microphone where he's at. He's just listening. But he said to share with you, he'd love to get a 1% charge on the $1 billion that they collect. So I know TADS has been in this for a long time.
Sure.
I've talked to you about Martin and TADS, and certainly urged you to reach out to each other and chat and see if there's anything you want to do together. But one of my experiences with Martin and with TADS is Martin is a very senior CPA. He got into the software business somewhere along the line. I think he bought someone else's business years ago. I've asked him where the name TADS comes from, and he told me once, but it's long ago forgotten what it stands for. But the bottom line is, it is essentially a system for doing some of the things that you guys at Hubbli do. He's got the online forms.
Mm-hmm.
You can apply online, you pay online, you create a database account.
Yeah.
In other words, you're setting up your family account. You can apply for one kid, more kids. You can apply for financial aid, which
right.
is certainly a service that a lot of the schools need and use.
Right.
You can set up their contracts online electronically.
Yeah.
I would imagine that's something that can be done just as well in Hubbli. And he does do the collection as well. And I think there he doesn't do an auto deduct, as I understand it. But he is authorized by the Internal Revenue Service as a subsidiary ledger.
Uh-huh.
We use TADS for that purpose. It gets a little tricky, in all fairness, I must tell you. It's hard when you're looking at QuickBooks and you're not getting moment-to-moment updates to know exactly how much money is owed you. You have to have, you're looking at two different things at the same time to try to figure out where you stand.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Now I'm sorry.
I would suggest also QuickBooks. I mean, like we're we try to reduce the amount of tools that schools need to use. So we actually offer the ability to see the balance owing per family or per student right inside Hubbli, because we're managing the invoices as well. But QuickBooks is obviously an accounting tool, and I wouldn't call Hubbli an accounting tool, although we just have an invoice management feature. And that's why we connect to QuickBooks, so you can easily run standard accounting reports more easily. But that's something you don't do on a day-to-day basis. So for like the big time savers are what's happening day to day. What are you doing repetitively over and over again? And that's where we try to focus our sort of time saving features on. So we just see those as like the bigger wins.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I certainly know that TADS is a very, very robust financial management tool. It's not QuickBooks, but it's certainly the things it does on a very sophisticated manner. Martin, by the way, writes "The Devil's in the Details." Martin, you may want to jump in more on that. By the way, Emma Rattingen in Scotland says to tell you, we decided to go on board with Hubbli for the next school year. In the past, we have consistently had polar opposite feedback from our families. They either love our communication or they tell us it sucks. We've worked really hard to streamline what we do.
Yeah.
We're excited to be trying out Hubbli, and I will be really interested to see what the response of our families is after the first 12 months. I personally think that Jono really is onto something with the idea that there is a gap in the market. What we don't have quite the same, while we don't in Scotland have the same litigious or lawsuit-happy atmosphere that you have in some other places, it is still very difficult to get teachers to understand the importance of communication. Let's see what we can do. Smile.
So thanks, Emma. We're certainly happy to have you on board with us. It's really great that we've got some customers now in Europe. If we can still consider you guys in Europe, I'm not sure. I think for the time being we can. Let's not get political here, but So we also have we've got somebody also in Paris that's using Hubbli too. Also both Montessori schools, and it's really it's humbling. And on it's funny. So like again on that topic of being sort of like having parents that are litigious. I want to just jump into the different some examples of different forms of communication and what's really ideal for those different forms of communication. So one thing we already brought up was like a social thread, right? So this is a picture of a Hubbli group, but again, this is pretty much the same thing you'll see in Facebook or a Google group, right? We're not reinventing this concept of a group and how groups can communicate, but I want to talk about what type of communication is really ideal. So like in what we see happening that works really well, and I would say that with Hubbli, just because of the nature of communicating with communication between parents and staff and parents, or vice versa. We've got hundreds of thousands of parent messages flying back and forth between our system from staff to parent and back and forth, mostly being triggered from these groups, because what these groups do is the idea is that schools are spending a lot of time just trying to manage to keep parents grouped up, because as we discussed, Tim, as you brought up, my tagline is schools are training parents to ignore them. One of the ways they're doing that is by basically sending everything to everybody all the time, and through multiple channels, and it gets it gets just, I mean, like anybody else, nobody, basically they're getting spammed. It's not technically spam because it's coming from their child's school, but it feels like spam because if the school's sending you as a parent, I mean, most people that work in schools are also parents of children in school, right? And if a school is sending you, a 3-page newsletter or a document to read, where there's 3 pages of small type font and 2 sentences actually pertain to you, that's pretty annoying and frustrating. That's just not a great experience. It's not like you want to kick up your feet at the on the coffee table and read through what's going on in everyone else's class, or it's just not that interesting, right? So so that's not how you want to communicate. You want to communicate only 100% relevant information to every parent. That's how you keep parents engaged. That's how you keep parents loving the communication at your school, and that's how you train them to actually pay attention to what you send them. Because if they see that every time they get a message from you or your staff, it is 100% relevant to them, they're going to read it and they're going to appreciate it, right? So we saw that schools have been trying to, much like the audience member, I forget who it was, are trying to use this group concept for that purpose, because when you've got parents of, let's say, a particular room in one group, and then if you communicate something in there, it's only going to those people. The problem is that that's always changing, and if you have to you have to manage multiple systems, then it just becomes too much work to keep those groups organized. So that's why we think we've solved it, how to make this easy for everybody, because we give you one tool that has all the different types of communication, so you've got one database to manage, and we also have it so that as students are enrolled, parents are automatically placed in the right groups or whatnot, so 95% of all your sort of group management just happens automatically. So it's not even work to keep those groups true and current. And then when you go into that group, so we've got an example here. Let's say Pat Kenefick here. So Pat is actually, I love Pat. It's a great story. She's actually part of our team now, but she started out as a Montessori parent. Then she worked for her daughter's Montessori school for a number of years as a communication director of communications, and now she's actually she was one of Hubbli's first customers. She got her school signed up, and then kind of just decided to come over to Hubbli because she felt so strongly about what we're doing. So she's actually part of our team now. So let's just say Pat, when she was working at her daughter's school, she would post a message just to the parents of class 104, right? So if she sends that message, something simple. The idea here is that this isn't about a 3-page newsletter. We'll get to that, how to do that in a second. But let's just say like an in-the-moment reminder. You're a teacher and oh yeah, tomorrow's pizza day. I just want to send a reminder out to the parents. So you don't want to have to figure out. You don't want to have to go and create a list and update the list and make sure everybody's email address is right and spend an hour doing that. You just want to be able to go into a system, whip out your phone and type something and send it to the right people. And in addition to that, what you really want to look for, and different tools will give you this. Hubbli, is one of them. But you want to make sure that you can track the statistics of the reception or the engagement of that information. So, for a pizza day reminder, it's not all that important that that if you see in the red box there's email stats. So that's something that's pretty important. When you've got something that's maybe a little more urgent, you want to know. You might want to track who opened it, who clicked on it, in real time. But in any event, we give it to you with every message you send. But that can be really helpful. If you click on any one of those, it would open up and you see exactly who got it or who replied to it, or who it got delivered to. And in different scenarios, that can be either nice to have, or it can be actually really, really important. So and then what's other great, sorry, this is a little bit cut off right now, but if you look underneath the comment section, let's say I'm a parent in this class, I actually got to ask a question. You know, like, is there a no meat option, right? So, okay, you're reminding me that parent's there and it's gluten-free, but, you know, I want, you know, we're vegetarian or we don't eat meat and want to make sure that there's a no meat option. And then Pat can actually answer that question. It got cut off, but she, you know, she would have a reply to that comment underneath. So if you think about how efficient that would be, you know, Pat, as, you know, let's say the teacher or the admin of this group, can answer questions for one person that, you know, 20 other parents might have the same question, but she answered it once, and then everybody can see the answer, right? So a lot of times when parents ask a question, other parents have the same question, and, you know, the worst thing you want to stay away from is doing this through, like, reply all email threads. Email groups are, you know, they're just bad news. You want to stay away from using reply all. And just, you know, I always have to show this because I love it. I just want to say, every time you hit reply all, a kitten dies. So I just want you to, next time, you know, you're sending a reply all, I want you to think about this guy, because you're killing him, and you shouldn't, because he's cute. So moving on. You know, so now we're going to talk about newsletters. What should go in a newsletter? You know, there's a time and a place for newsletters, and it's not. I'm going to say maybe it's not every week. Maybe it is. You know, there's certain things that, you know, some school communities or communicators, like, you know, our goal is not to overly define how people use the tools or how often they use them, but our goal with education, with webinars like this, is to try to influence our customers, our you know, community, to use tools for their best case scenario. And we think that newsletters are not great, are not the best place to send you know, sort of like boring details, right? And that's why we created the groups, because our groups, if I just go back here for a second, our groups have, you know, events, so every group has a calendar, and there's documents in there, and there's media, and you can share all that stuff inside the group. So, like, you know, our groups, like, you want to use a group for those types of things, for for events, and you want people to be notified with bite-sized, real-time notifications, because that's what parents get, and that's what they expect. That's what they're behaviorally used to today, and ideally, you want those types of tools to be able to synchronize with the parents' you know, existing tools. So it's very, very important. Actually, to make one more point, it's very, very important that you don't require parents to log in to the system to reply, right? So, like with Hubbli, and other tools do this too, but, like, if you were to send a notification in the group, if you notice here, the parents, you know, the parent, with Hubbli's example, that same message we saw in the group, you know, this would go to the parent's inbox, and then they could just reply directly from here without having to log into the system. That is something you want to make sure, like, again, this isn't about Hubbli. This is about how you get parents to engage. You want to make sure parents don't have to log into a system to engage the communication. You want to remove all barriers from, you know, you want things to be as convenient as possible. And if they have to log into a system, that's one extra step, which can be frustrating. And basically, anytime somebody has to perform another step, more labor to engage your communication, you're going to get drop-off. So if you want to promote the most parent engagement possible, it needs to synchronize, it needs to show up and be engageable where the parents currently engage everything else, right? And that's why, you know, and that's why schools are using all these different tools, right? The problem is that they don't know how, it's too much to manage, right? To do it efficiently and properly. So that's why, you know, a system like Hubbli centralizes it all, so that you send a message in one place, and it goes out to all the places that parents, you know, are looking already for communication, and it allows them to reply directly from there. Another example of that is with our events. So every group has the ability to have a calendar, and you want it to synchronize. And a lot of tools that have calendars do this. If they have a calendar online, they should have the ability to synchronize with their personal calendar app on their iPhone or their Android or their Google Calendar. You want to give them that ability. Of course, Hubbli has that ability too, and other tools do as well. But you just want to make sure that the main point here, again, I can't stress this enough, if you want parents to use the system, because you can build any system you want, but they're not going to use it if it's too much of a pain in the butt. And I think that's what Emma was getting at. Like, some parents will engage it, some just won't. And so you want to remove the barrier for everybody and make it as convenient as possible. And I just want to double check that you guys are hearing me. If Timmy could just let me know, because I heard some background noise and then it just disappeared. And so am I still being heard okay? Is this thing on? Did we lose Tim? So, okay, I'm gonna assume that we're still good to go. I'll just keep on going down this track, but I think we might have lost Tim or Michael. But looks like we still have a bunch of people, so I'm gonna truck on here. Bear with me one moment. Okay, so to move on, so I think I've stressed this point enough, right? You want a system that doesn't require parents to log in to receive or engage the information. Super crucial. And okay, to go back, I think I got off track, right? I was talking about newsletters, and if anybody wants to, pipe up and ask any questions about this or argue with me, I'm happy to defend my point. I'm happy to debate. If you want to tell me I'm wrong, I want to hear why. But let's talk about what should go in your newsletters, to come back to this point. Newsletters are really best used for less frequent communications, and they're really ideal for talking about your school on a higher level. That's what we think. That's what I think, and not just me, but the research that I do into communications and how best to use different tools, and that's why a newsletter tool, generally speaking, is more rich media. It's like if you look at this example here, this is just one of the templates that Hubbli offers to start designing from. So you can sort of pick a template and start changing it, customizing it. But it's like it's the type of thing you want to have fun with and like really spend time like making it beautiful and adding branding and really crafting helpful, more engaging content. So they should really be focused on parent education, educating parents, giving them tools, understanding, understandings that they can like really use at home with their kids, right? Like parent education. This is the stuff that I know the Montessori Foundation is incredibly invested into, and knows a lot more about than I do. But educating parents on especially on Montessori, being in Montessori parents, but just being parents of children in school. My kids actually are not yet in school, and mine are both still in diapers, but they'll start going to programs pretty soon, probably in Montessori. I think that's probably what's going to happen after all this time I've spent with the Montessori Foundation. I'm pretty much sold. And so I think your newsletters, should be something that is a value add, and no matter what, just make sure that whatever is in the newsletter, it's not something that any parent would avoid. Meaning, make sure it's 100% relevant. That's the I think that's the marker. No matter what it is, make sure it's relevant to anybody that's reading it. You know, because your communication to parents is super important, and you don't want to create that relationship between you and the parent that is you never want parents to ignore communication from you. And that's what we see. And it's such a drastic issue. And especially when, if you look at all the research, the money spent that goes into, you know, my wife's uncle is Fred Mednick. He's the founder of Teachers Without Borders. And he's